I'm Ari Goldstein, Senior Public Programs Producer at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. And it's a pleasure to welcome you to today's program, exploring neuroscience and the legacy of the Holocaust with the Ripple Project, which you'll hear all about today. We're going to get started with our moderator today, who is Israeli actress, writer, and director Millie Avital, who has starred in countless films and has won the Israeli Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. Millie will kick us off in a moment and introduce the other panelists and the discussion. Please feel free to share questions and comments in the Zoom Q&A box throughout the discussion today, and we'll get to as many as we can towards the end. We're indebted to the Battery Park City Authority today for their support and collaboration of this program and so much of what we do here at the museum. This program is sponsored in part through the Battery Park City Authority Community Partnership. Without further ado, welcome Millie, Liron, Roy, and Daniela on behalf of all of us at the museum. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ari. Thank you, Museum of Jewish Heritage, and members and audience and all of your that are joining today. I would like to introduce to you the people who will speak the most in this program, which their work we're going to explore. The first would be Liron Unreich. Liron was born in Israel, graduate of NYU School of the Arts, and an award-winning visual storyteller of various capacities: film direction, computer animation, imaging technology consultant, and exhibition design. His collaborative work has been seen at South by Southwest, Mass MoCA, Celebrate Brooklyn, among others. Also with us is Daniela Schiller. She's Israeli-born cognitive neuroscientist, best known for her research in the area of memory reconsolidation, or the process of restoring memories after they've been retrieved. Daniela leads the Affective Neuroscience Lab at the Mount Sinai School of Medicine. Her work was published in numerous scholarly journals, as well as several influential books. She's a recipient of multiple awards, including the New York Academy of Science Blavatnik, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Award for Science. Also with us is Roy Wol. Roy is a recipient of the PGA Producers Mark. He was born in Israel, moved around as a child from Argentina to Turkey to Canada before settling in the United States. His films focus on experiences of intersectionality, impact, and technology. His latest film, The Garden Left Behind, won at South by Southwest and was named as one of the top 40 best LGBTQ films of all time by Rotten Tomatoes. He is the founder of Studio Autonomous and proud third culture kid. So we would like to start, of course, with Liron, who will tell us about the Ripple effect, the Ripple project that he's been working on for over a decade, you said just a minute ago?
Yeah, I know. It's hard to believe, yes. Hi, Millie. Thank you so much. Thank you, Museum. Thank you, Ari. Thank you, everybody, for the opportunity to allow us to present to you what we've been doing. I'm going to try to condense. Let's see if this works. So technology is 50-50 with us, but I'm going to do a share screen, put this in there. And if there are any problems with audio or anything, please let me know. You should be seeing my keynote now. So, okay, great. Let me just hide this. Okay, this is the challenge here is to condense 40 years of stories, 10 to 15 years of work, thousands of our man hours, hundreds of faces into probably 15 minutes that are cohesive, and I'm going to try to do it. So here it goes. This is how I grew up. I'm not the only one speaking like this. Millie is here with me, and so is Daniela, born in Israel. This was our childhood. This is what we understood that our Eastern European ancestors came from, our Northern African families came from. This was our reality, and this was only a generation away, 2 generations away. This is your great uncle. This is your great great aunt. This is your great grandfather or your grandfather for many cases. And this is a brutal but honest way to grow in a community. I had a very happy childhood, which was protective. It was sheltered, but I did go through. I don't even know what it is or how to describe it. There was an incident, a psychological incident, when I was probably about 10 years old, where I was hospitalized for a short time, something I came to term with pretty late in life. And this event was never really resolved. And there's a kind of a joke in the family that the only way to get me back to school after these episodes was when some doctor screamed at me and said, "Get your ass back in school, kid." And that's how I got back. And the family has never spoken about this again. I was very, very close to my grandparents. And later in life, I learned that them leaving Israel was coincidental with the time that I was going through these episodes. I followed my grandmother and grandfather to the United States. I was probably 14 or 15, leaving home. And that's already me now as a father, and my daughter being 12. I cannot even imagine an experience like this for the parent and for the child. But during my time there in the United States, I have decided to videotape my grandfather, who was a prolific storyteller. People would gather around, listen to his jokes, listen to his stories. It was endless. And I was taken by it. And I decided to turn on a camera one day and just start asking him questions. He was a single survivor from a family of 7 brothers and sisters, all lost, parents lost, cousins, uncles, really the morbid tale of it all. And through ingenuity, dumb luck, and just a good sense of living, he managed to get through. When that interview was over, I wrapped up the tapes, threw them away. And I even recall when I was interviewing him, certain point, his stories were even a little boring to me. I didn't really understand them. I was only maybe 16 at the time. Then this happened. I had a kid, and 2 of them, to be honest, boy and a girl. And at that point, like many others, I'm an immigrant, and I have to kind of ask myself the question, what am I bringing to the next generation? How are those little ones going to remember me? How are they going to know my grandfather, the person I was close to? At the time, I think it was when Lavi was born, I was getting these flashbacks of the interview with my grandfather, which was something I never expected. Complete segments, complete stories were coming back into my memory, even though I haven't seen those tapes in years. So what I did was I decided to open up and dust those tapes and see what I could do with them. I contacted my grandfather's best friend at the time. His name was Herman Taub. My grandfather has passed at that point, and this was in Maryland. And his friend, who was also a poet and writer, who dedicated his whole life to commemorating stories of other survivors. And I was inspired by that. And I wanted to come and ask him, how can I retell Saba, which is grandfather, Saba's story, that it would mean something for my children. I didn't think about making it for anybody else. It was really just for them. And he said, Liron, do the thing you do best. And at that time, and still today, I make movies. So I took my brother, took my cousin, got a couple cameras, and we decided to allow Herman to tell the story of my grandfather through his eyes. But there was a disconnect there. I felt that Herman had his own story to tell. And the only time it was effective is when we were actually reading the transcript of my grandfather's words or playing the tape in the background while Herman was just sitting in the room and going through his daily life. And this is the result of that. And I hope if you can hear it, I hope the sound is okay.
מה היה קורה אם הייתי רב? מה הייתי עונה ליהודים המסכנים האלה? מה קרה לעם שלהם? מה קרה? מה הייתי אומר לאנשים שגרמנים רחצו ידיהם בסבון שעשוי מחלב של אמי? מה הייתי אומר לאנשים האלה שגרמניה התפרסמה מזה שהיא עשתה אהילים באור של אבי, של אחיותיי, של יהודים אחרים? אני קיבלתי שוק.
So in an essence, this is Yitzhak's audio, his voice from that tape, and Herman reacting to it in his everyday living in suburban Maryland. When I put those two together, I realized that I had a much bigger story. And at that point, I said, okay, I got to find out more. So I started traveling around, and because I'm in the creative field, I was interested in creativity and the Holocaust and people who were creating under dire conditions. And I went to camps, met dozens of survivors, I met their kids, grandkids. So it was probably 6 years of hard work, hundreds of hours of videos. But the issue is that I was not making a direct connection. I don't want to say that I wasn't satisfied with the work I was doing, but I didn't feel like I was getting closer to understanding my own pain and my own personal journey, why I left home when I was 15. What is my role? And I almost gave up. I remember I was sitting with my interns at the time in Brooklyn. And by the way, one of them was Roy, who is now a famous producer, but at the time was just an intern. And one of the interns gave me an address for a survivor who lives literally across the street from my old address. Of course, I didn't believe that person because that's just me. And I said, you're wasting my time. But I said, what the heck? I went and knocked on the door and I met Fred Turner. Those of you who know who Fred Turner is, and there's many, I think his voice is in the Museum of Jewish Heritage, is in the main hallway. You can hear his voice as one of the narrators. He's one of the most prolific and important living Jewish artists who survived the Holocaust. His non-representational work is groundbreaking, but that wasn't what this was about. And I've spent a few days with Fred, and this is what happened.
This is. Yes. Well, you know, this was a memory as it was, and this is how the memory is changing, not of the horror, but how I feel today is more positive, alive. And this is an in-between painting, and it combines both sides of these paintings, shared memory.
Shared memory. Intrusive memory, which is a phenomena where a person will be attacked by memories and traumas of the past, is something that people with PTSD deal with a lot. And one of the things that Fred would say is that after he speaks of the Shoah to a group, it's like you have like a bass player in his belly, or somebody in his soul who plays so loud, and it takes him days to recover from it because all these memories resurface. And Fred's ability to deal with memory as if it was fluid, as if it was a sculpture, as if it was one of his pieces. A same story, same piece, same history, same picture look different 30 years in between, because that's his attitude towards the memory has blown my mind. It still does today. It gave me the strength to believe that I have the power to control some of these experiences. And I'm not just a passive part of it, but I am active. And that to me was a game changer. In the screening for this short, when I was working on it, Daniela and Millie came. And after the short was done, and we had a wonderful speech by Fred, and it was extremely touching. Daniela came down to me, Millie introduced her to me. And Daniela said, "Oh, this is great, good job. I don't like Holocaust movies, as you probably heard in the movie, but good job, good for you." And I said, "Oh, well, nice to meet you. Thank you. Why did you come?" He said, "Well, my dad, it's a kind of a funny thing. I talk about him. He's a survivor, but he never speaks of his experience, and he doesn't stand during the sirens of the Holocaust Memorial Day, which is a no-no in Israel. But he's never going to speak." And I said, "Well, I'd be curious to speak to him." She goes, "You're going to waste your time." I said, "Well, great. I'm good at wasting my time." 2 weeks later, we were there with cameras and sitting in front of Zygmunt, and the rest is history.
מה אם תמות, ואז לא נדע כלום, אז אני רוצה לפחות לפני...
לא תדעו כלום, גם אין מספיק ספרות על הנושאים האלה?
לא, זה לא השואה, זה מעניין אותי אתה.
אני לפעמים מהסס לדבר, כי אני בצרפתית אומרים avoir peur du ridicule. דווקא דברים כאלה שזה נראה כלום, זה מה שכואב לי.
Our next storyteller is also a scientist. She is a drummer, and tonight she has a documentary film crew following her around, and I'm very excited.
That's Daniela. One of the lessons or the experiences here is that besides the fact that we were sitting with Zygmunt in a moment where he has never spoken before, and Daniela's going to elaborate this a lot more. Again, it was this empowering moment where I felt I've become so selfish about my storytelling and where I want to go with this, that I have the power to absorb, I have the power to influence. And as long as there's a recipient on the other side, it becomes a cycle. And that cycle is enriching to everyone around. When I was working on Itzhak's movie, the one you saw earlier, I have a friend who's a producer, a mutual friend of myself and Mark. And he introduced me to Mark. Mark is an artist. He is an artist, a New York artist. When you meet him, his art does not represent Jewish upbringing or Jewish life. It does recently, but not when I met him. I was in a show of his, a solo show of his, these hyper-realistic paintings. And this was in upstate New York. And he came to me and he said, "Are you," and he has this kind of deep voice, "Are you Liron?" I said, "Yes." So, "I've seen your Isaac movie, your grandfather movie." And he just froze. And then he gave me a hug, and I just met the guy, and he goes, "My kike." And I know it's a word that one cannot say, but when I've heard it, I was empowered. There was a confidence there, and I could feel that the word is spreading, and people were joining in. And Mark's story blew my mind. Mark told me that he is a clandestine art Holocaust scholar. He investigated art that was done during the Holocaust. And it was my goal too, this idea of creativity under terrible conditions. Because without that creative spirit, what is left of us? And Mark would lecture all across the country. And there he met this little tiny, physical, tiny, grand person named Dina Jacobson. She was a survivor. And they met in Elmira, upstate New York. And when you heard Mark describe Dina, it felt like two people in love. Mark's description of her was so warm but so deep that I couldn't help myself but to follow that journey. And we've empowered Mark and sat down in front of Dina, and Mark has done a deep interview with her where we shot both of them. And at the end, he's painted a portrait of her.
Are we on? Oh, I didn't know. No one said, "Mark, go." You're going to edit this, correct? I mean, this is just...
but each time you ask a question, maybe just stay looking at the camera for the next one.
Yeah, I'm going to start again. So here's what you're going to say, and your hands could be down. My name, look at me though. My name is Dina Jacobson. I am from Bachora, Poland, born in 1922.
My name is Dina Jacobson. I was born in Poland, May the 5th, 1922. Every night the Gestapo came in to pick people to go to the gas chamber. They didn't see me because I was the smallest one. Nobody tried to help us at all. When I went to a neighbor to give me a potato or a piece of bread, they closed the door on me.
The idea is we're going to end every interview with the person, and you're the first, so you're setting the precedent. So we want everyone just to close their eyes and keep them closed.
This idea of post-memory witnessing, the fact that Mark can live Dina's horror and take the responsibility of retelling him through a portrait or a story was exactly something that was breathtaking to me and inspiring. The last character in this journey is David. David is not a Jew. I met David under normal circumstances through some school event. And as I was hanging out there, I heard the word Abba. Abba, it means father in Hebrew. And I own Abba because I'm the only Abba that I know in that classroom. But when I saw a little girl go to David, I said to him, "Hey, I didn't know you were Israeli." He said, "No." "Are you Jewish?" "No." "Why is your kid calling you Abba?" He said, "It's some other story. I'll tell you some other time." Through the years, David has gotten to know my work. And one day he wrote me a letter. And this is what he said.
Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? Where am I heading? One night before the meal, while saying the prayer, I had this vision. Soldiers kicked in the door and they took us. There's no such thing as coincidence. What's our connection? A teacher at the Kabbalah Center in Manhattan told me, "David, you were one of us. You were part of the German resistance. You brought us food." I'm a Christian, I'm a Jew, I'm a Holocaust survivor. I'm on a quest to find out the details of my story.
David has put it all on the line. David has everything to lose from this film. These are deep, deep secrets of somebody who is creative director at an advertising agency, a wife, 2 kids, and nobody knows that story. And now, well, many of you do. He's opened up to me, and this idea of, it's a term called prosthetic memory, is when someone else's memories from another culture are being lived through you. And that is just, David hasn't lived, or maybe he has, through these experiences, but now they're his. And I find that unbelievably empowering. And the way David sees me and the way he describes me, and we've spoken many times, is words I hear about my grandfather. You're a great storyteller. You inspire me. You made me laugh 300 years ago. And this is part of my journey. And that's why we're here today. So hope that's, let's see, done. I think that's it. Yep. Am I back?
Sorry, it's an incredible project, and what's really interesting is actually how there's a horizontal quality to it, which is where you explore people in different parts of the world and cultures, but there's also a vertical part of it, which is going through the different generations. And your angle is particularly unique, which is really about the second generation or third generation, the effect of post-traumatic memory. And that brings us to Daniela, who, of course, her angle is neuroscience, but also you have a personal stake in this. Can you tell a little bit about what brought you to eventually go and interview your dad, even though you didn't want to?
I didn't have anything to lose. It was close to 88. It was like around 86, and yeah, there was no use. I kept asking him, and nothing happened. I heard about different Holocaust projects, and I was trying to call and figure out something. Everything was kind of a lost cause until I met Liron, and he was willing to take the risk. I mean, I thought it's gonna be weird, because what am I gonna bring strangers to my home? Why would my father talk to them? But it was just a kind of like suicide mission, in a sense that I'll just try, just try anything. And it was worth it.
And how is it connected? How did it affect your life in a way that affected your work and research? His witnessing someone who walks around with a trauma.
You mean before he told his story?
Yes, just from growing up in it. Because like Liron was saying, when you grow up in Israel, you grow up among PTSD. The whole country is PTSD, whether it's Holocaust survivor or wars, or right. We're all, and so I think as kids we really are. Those images you showed, which or maybe would shock people that didn't grow up with it. It's true. That was kind of our default pictures of history. So the question is that for you, having someone at home carrying that load, how did it affect your research?
Yeah, it was an added weight on the whole thing. Not only you get it in ceremonies and in school and in all sorts of education, you come home and you know that he has to do something with it. And like anybody who doesn't tell you, who holds a secret, your imagination starts to run free. There's no limit to what you can imagine. And the fact that he didn't want to talk about it was even making the way I imagined it darker. You just don't know. And it was, I was aching for a link. Kind of, I felt that if he would tell me, we would make a connection. And as long as he didn't tell me, it felt like a wall between us.
Is there a link that we can see something of the?
Yes, Ari, there's Ari, if you can hear me, there's one of the videos I gave you. It's about Daniela and her father. It's Daniela and her father. Do you see that, Ari?
Like I mentioned in the bio, that Daniela's have had groundbreaking research, and especially reconsolidation of memory, and this is her field, so here we are.
זה מעצבן שמשהו משתלט עליך ואתה לא יכול.
כן, כי אני הצלחתי להתגבר על זה.
איך?
אני פעם ראיתי אדם שפחד מאוד, וזה כל כך השפיע עליי, שאמרתי, הרי זה יותר גרוע מהמוות. המצב הזה, שמתחננים על החיים. זה הכי גרוע מהמוות עצמה. אז אמרתי, אני רוצה למנוע את זה אצלי, אני לא אפחד.
I think that one of the most, this is part of what we discussed, and I think Daniela, this was a shocker for you maybe, but when meeting Daniela, she was always about controlling fear. I mean, this is, I don't want to simplify what you do, but it is about being able to control abstract notions. And I know you're a drummer, you do skydiving, and it's all about controlling. You had anxiety of performance, you became a drummer. You were scared to jump off airplanes, you started jumping off airplanes. It's about controlling fear. And all of a sudden, her father comes in and just simply opens that Gordian knot like it's nothing. And I remember Daniela's face there. And it was a face of, she was stunned. She said, you did this? Yes, I can control it. She goes, what? And that was just, to me, an amazing moment. Another thing is Daniela held a camera. So we gave Daniela a small camera. And when we first met Zygmunt, and she sat in front of him with the camera, and we're all around him, I think he didn't want to embarrass Daniela. And he said, what the hell? I'm going to talk. And that's what we have.
Before we move to Roy, I just wanted to ask a question about Liron. Maybe you can even answer it later, but to connect us from your experience as the creator of this project, is there a common denominator between the second or third generation? In other words, what is the effect that you could see on people in general? Is there a general quality?
So I'm not a scientist, and there's people who do research about this day and night, full organizations that do this. I think deep inside as human beings, we all know the answer. From epigenetics, we know by now, as a matter of fact, that if somebody goes through a trauma, that will affect an unborn child. That will physically change your DNA structure. It's something that researchers, but as humanity, we've always known that. There's a lot of secrets that we know deep inside. I think it's trauma, since trauma is you have a black and white trauma where you obviously can see someone who's gone through a horrific experience. My grandfather, he's lost everybody. He came home, saw his family dead, his hair turned white. He suffered through PTSD. Done deal. But what is my trauma? I've had a great life. How dare I say that I suffered from a trauma? But I do believe that I did, and many of us do. It's all about this idea of receiving, this idea of opening up to this experience, and hoping then you see it in others. Is the trauma diminished through the generations? From what I've seen, it just changes, but does not diminish.
Well, definitely communicating over the generations. That's definitely part of there's no doubt that's part of the healing process. And I'd love to invite Roy to tell us your personal part in the project and your past, your present, and how your work on film that's related to minorities and transgenders are part of this.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much. It's seeing Liron speak about this again, it's so emotional for me, and also seeing this interaction between all of us. So just like Liron said, I was just an intern who found Liron through Craigslist.com, which is a website that no longer is used, I think, as much. And at the time, the posting was related to some story about a play that would be put on Rwanda about the genocide. And so I was very inspired by that. I met the team of the Ripple Project. At the time, it was a different version of what it is now. And it was very inspiring. And pretty quickly, we gelled. Liron, I see Liron as my brother, older brother, although I do have a real brother as well, who's in England now. And slowly we got more and more involved. I did some sound design. I did some, not sound design, sound recording actually. I was involved in some of the interviews, and years later, here we are trying to, launch this project, and with the help of everybody involved. And in terms of like stories and impact, which is something that I think incredibly important, I always remind myself that narratives are the programming of the human mind. I see it almost like in a scientific level, although I'm not a scientist, and I apologize in advance if there's to Daniela first, and then anyone else a scientist, listening to this. But I strongly believe that stories have a very, very strong impact on the human mind, especially when you're a child, when your brain is still developing and so forth. So as a third culture kid myself, which many people don't know this term, yes, I'm Jewish, half Ashkenazi, half Sephardic. My dad's side, the Turkish side, from the Spain, they, that side didn't really have that much experience with regards to Holocaust, besides, sharing the stories. But there was no one in the family that had a barcode per se. And on my mom's side, the Argentinian mom, she was born in Argentina, but her parents were the immigrants. And my grandpa, apparently, who I never met, he passed away before I was born, had the barcode on his arm. And I'll be very honest, in my family, the Holocaust, with regards to my grandpa, wasn't as much discussed. And I remember through my mom that he was a very happy man. And this is the limit of it, which I always found it a little, protective, perhaps. There was this unspoken thing. And when I met Liron and saw what he was going after, and I felt so connected to what he was doing. And to be quite frankly, I live Holocaust through Liron. I see this project for myself as also a way to live this, and a way to share with my kids if I have some. And in terms of, back to the other work as well, in terms of minority, not to go out of the Holocaust subject, but I as a third culture kid, I believe in intersectionality. I believe in sharing stories with each other and including, and I feel one of the characters in the story that Liron has crafted so beautifully is going beyond our community and is including another community as well, which I think it's going to be very helpful with impact screenings that we're hoping to do after the film. I can speak more about this, but at Studio Autonomous, we have done stories related to the transgender community, where we've employed nearly 50 people. We've also done projects with American Muslim experience. These are all minorities, and the hope is to bridge between all the communities. And I always say, trauma doesn't know race, trauma doesn't know gender, trauma doesn't know time, and I think this story connects them all.
And can you just clarify, what is the third culture?
It's interesting. I had an interview yesterday about this, but there's a really nice graph I can share, but I wasn't ready to share it. But in everyone is different, but a lot of people who during their childhood, during their development phase, when they move between many cultures, they become used to permanent goodbyes, and they're basically from nowhere, they're from everywhere. So to give you an example, I grew up a portion of my life in Turkey. My name is Roy. Roy is not a Turkish name,
right,
but people thought I was Armenian because that's what they see. So throughout my childhood, I had to explain I'm not Armenian. And then when I was in Argentina, they called me El Turco, but that's a different story because Argentina called El Turco everyone in the Middle East. And so naturally, we spoke about this with Liron too, but naturally, I still feel today that I don't think I have a home, and I continue to travel. I hope to stop one day, but the stories are taking me there, and I repatriated to the US because, I believe US is a beautiful melting pot with all its glory and all its everything, And I do feel New York that is a beautiful place, and I see that everyone is actually in this panel also in New York. So,
yeah, and definitely we're all connected by history and past. And can I ask Daniela? Daniela, can you tell a little bit about the Reconsolidation, which is sort of the result of your process, also with your dad, I'm assuming?
Yeah, Reconsolidation is it's a term that was coined in the 60s, but it actually got in use in the last 2 decades, when there was kind of a rebirth of the interest in a process of memory modification. We used to think that memory is permanent, that you store it once through a process of consolidation. This is a theory that dominated the entire 20th century. And then a few decades ago, there was some pretty compelling evidence that when you retrieve a memory, it has to be stored again, and it undergoes a process that is similar to the initial storage. And this is why it was termed reconsolidation. And because it has to be restored, the moment you retrieve it is actually the moment where it's unstable. It actually might be gone if you don't store it again. And once you do store it, you could modify it. It could incorporate new information that is available at the time of retrieval. And that changed the view of memory. It was a paradigm shift. And now, instead of thinking of short-term memory switching into long-term memory, we think about memory that is active and inactive. And once it's active, it could be revised.
So we can change our memories, what you're saying?
I think it's what the research is suggesting is that the natural function of memory is to be dynamic, that it goes from the state of being active and inactive, and along the way it changes. So it's not always the case, but there are a lot of opportunities in the lifetime of the memory to revise it.
So I have a question for you about that. That clip I showed with Fred. So Fred he paints a painting of this was a killing a graveyard that he saw 70 years ago. And he painted that painting about 6 times in his life. And every time he says that painting looks different because his memory of the event is different. Would that be a parallel to reconsolidation?
Yeah, there was a really remarkable moment in Fred's movie that deeply moved me. And that was the moment I knew I want to work with you because outside of the research, I've never saw such an accurate depiction of it in art. I only thought about it and heard about it in the context of science, but he showed it so beautifully. And it's important because the idea of memory modification has several levels. Some aspects of it is that you just modify the facts. That's kind of one topic of research, but one that I was more interested in is that you change the emotional tone of it, how you feel when you retrieve it. And I think this is what Fred was capturing. It was the emotion that he has when he remembers. So it's not about the changing of the memory, it's the changing of your emotional reaction to it.
Wow, that's just
No, it's and it feels also so relevant as memory is we're dealing with memory even on a daily basis as we read the news and rely on people's memory for whether it's legal stories or emotional stories, and it just feels so incredibly relevant, especially that today we have more cameras that maybe will maybe will make memories more the opposite of dynamic. Maybe they will make it a lot
locked.
But what do you think is why is this project, the Ripple project, so relevant? Because it is relevant and it's incredibly moving. And why is it so relevant these days?
Well, I can speak for me. We live in Bed-Stuy, and if anyone who's here has heard this story, I apologize, but we live in Bed-Stuy, and during the Black Lives Matter protest and wonderful voices that came up in the air, we were on Bedford Avenue, which was one of the main arteries of that. And as I was going through this was just coming off in the middle of the pandemic. I was spending a lot of time in my basement. I was working. I was a lot of time alone. And again, when I go through harder and confusing times, I refer back to my Bible, which is like 20 hours of my grandfather's words. And in there was a story that he told about his sister. His sister was together with the brothers and sisters. They escaped to Russia, what is today a border town, but it was in Russia. They escaped Poland. When the war broke, they've heard about this awful thing. So, okay, I got to go. Let's get our parents from Poland. So the younger sister said, no problem. I'm going to go take a train. I'm going to go back, bring Abba and Ima, we're going to bring him to Russia. Everybody will be fine. She gets on the train and she gets back to her hometown. This would be the equivalent of my daughter getting off on Franklin Avenue on the C stop, a train stop she takes all the time and she knows. As she got off the train, she was 17 at the time, Polish Nazi soldier stopped her and said to her what she didn't know, that at that point the laws have changed and Jews had to wear a yellow star. She didn't know that. So as she stopped, the young police officer stops her and says, "Let me see your papers." She goes, "Why would I show you my papers? This makes no sense." Like, "Let me see your papers." Looks at the paper, goes, "Are you a Jew?" Again, irrelevant. Leave me alone. I don't know anything. "Okay, you're a Jew. Where's your yellow star?" At this point, says, "What yellow star? I don't know what you're talking about. I just want to go home. I live 2 blocks away. I got to go pick up my parents. Get me the yellow star. Show me the yellow star. You know what? I'm pulling you in." He pulled her in. "You're under arrest." At that point, she's the rebel that she was. She spat in his face. And he shot her on the spot in front of everybody in that town square. And that's the reason we know the story. That moment of her being shot has started the downfall of the family because there was nobody to bring the parents back. Then the other brothers and sisters who were already safe in Russia decided to come back to Poland and bring the parents, and they got captured in Poland. In that sense, that was the end of that family line. And that story was right after George Floyd was happening. And my DNA was screaming like, "Hey, someone in your family knows this. There's a story that happened to you before, and it can happen again." And I think that's why these stories are extremely valuable, because they're not part of some unique culture. They're not part of a Jewish country club. They're stories of humanity, and that's why I'm continuing with this project.
So it's great, and I want to continue with questions because we have really fascinating questions from the audience, and I don't want to ignore it, even though we can keep on talking about so many things. I'm going to read. I have about 5 questions that I'd like to relate to you. So the first question is it easier to talk to strangers rather than family about personal trauma, and why? Anybody would like to answer that?
Got to be Daniela. You got to go for that, Daniela.
Yeah, it was definitely the case with my father, and I think what Liron provided was a bridge between us. And even when he talked, it was like he wasn't talking to me. He was actually talking to the other people, to Liron and to David, the cameraman. And I realized that because I'm his daughter, it was the hardest, and I'm the youngest that keep pestering him about tell me. And it's just the hardest to talk to your daughter because you want to protect her. And now I understand, after he talked, which was actually a little bit, I realized why he didn't talk until this day. And I see how it affects me, and I can imagine what would happen if I heard this as a young kid. And he had the sense that you can't just drop it on little children, and you're not really sure when they're ready. And what I thought is that I think there was a moment he understood, I'm ready. And this is when he shared, but I still think it wouldn't have happened without the movie, without that bridge that gave him the platform and the context that he could manage in terms of revealing his thoughts and feelings.
Right, and that's the nice thing about art, isn't it? When films especially, which is it really opens up your heart and allows you to experience things that maybe you wouldn't with your own family. And so thank you, Elizabeth, for this question. And I have a question from Eileen. Have you explored how memories are written and rewritten in autobiographies and autofiction? Anybody wants to relate to that?
I think Daniela also, you start with that, right, Daniela?
Because it's
well, okay, go ahead, Daniela.
I mean,
okay, I have a small something I did notice during my time of doing the work. And again, this is interviewing I want to say dozens and dozens of people, and usually in the beginning, when we were trying to get this project up and running, we were trying to ask the same questions for survivors. Eventually, of course, none of it worked, and it wasn't something that was successful. But what I did learn is that people who had a shared experience, for example, in Theresienstadt, or if there were survivors that went to Auschwitz at the same time, usually the stories matched. And they would match in a way that wasn't always, if you granularly check somebody's biography and their time at the camp, some of the things that they've described and so were not really at the camp, but they were more of the famous iconography of the place at the time. So I don't know if that answers the question, but this idea, but that person would still be convinced that that is their memory of the event. And this is what they have seen, even though most likely what they have seen is their memory is a collection of pictures, stories, and then their personal experience interjected inside. And that I've seen firsthand a few times with many survivors.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what we're dealing with the fact that it's dynamic, even though there is an emotional truth, which is a fact. But
That's a fact, yes.
But the details can be dynamic. And this is a question from Jeremy, and this is maybe more for Roy. Do Sephardic communities in Israel have inherited trauma from the Inquisition or the expulsion from Arab countries, or is it inherited trauma unique to Ashkenazi Israelis? So
interesting. You know, I should have mentioned, thanks for the question, but I only lived in Tel Aviv until I was 6 months old, which creates complication for me. I can speak more for the Turkish Sephardic experience.
Yeah. Or just in general about the Sephardic experience, exactly.
No, definitely. In the Sephardic community in Turkey, the Spanish Inquisitions, that story always is shared. And it's really interesting because I think now we must be a little less than 9,000 people. And I went to a Jewish school in Istanbul, the only one. And yeah, the Spanish Inquisition story was always talked about. And especially through the Ladino stories, the Ladino songs, and the Ladino experiences. But there's certainly a disconnect between the older generation and the younger generation. I don't know why. I don't have an answer to this, but for some reason, the Ladino experience is kind of by the youth. Okay, not anymore youth, but when I was younger, millennials, the Ladino language was kind of like made a little bit fun of, to be very honest. It wasn't like something that was, okay, culturally is important, but it also was kind of like a joke actually within the youth at the time that I was young. And I can speak for the entire school. And but I don't know if that answers it, but
well, certainly there's no doubt that the both cultures carry something with them, except that the Holocaust is obviously more recent and more has a clear narrative. And as somebody was asking if you used the term barcode intentionally.
I saw that question. I will answer that. I just wanted to add one more thing with regards to the question you asked before. It's really interesting when the law opened up. I don't know if our American audiences know about this, but there's a law that opened up for Sephardic Jews to be able to get their Spanish citizenships through claiming Inquisition. When that opened up, there was even more of an embracing of that heritage, which is a story in itself. You know, that's something to be mentioned. And so, the barcode thing, yes. I mean, I hope there was no disrespect. I understand that it's a very sensitive subject. You know, for me, the way I see it is that you know, it's a form of expression from my end of insensitivity. You know, the inhumane experiences that our heritage went through. So
yeah, it is shocking when we see that.
I'm sorry that I put it so, you know, that way.
I thought it was an excellent description.
Really? Okay, because it is inhumane. You know, it's very robotic and horrible. So
yeah, it is. It's honest, because that's what it was then, wasn't it? And there's an important question from Janet about the question is this concept of memory modification used clinically in trauma work with patients to change the emotional charge of memory? And that's probably the most relevant question in terms of even the effects of the Ripple Project. You know, how can we use this to heal?
Many of the existing therapies, regardless of the scientific aspects of it, have developed to change memories in this way independently. In many forms of therapies, they do work on reactivating the memory and then going through the memory in a safe environment, as in to update the memory. But that developed independently by therapists and trial and error and seeing what works. And then in parallel, the science discovered kind of at the neurobiological level indications that in the brain that when you reactivate the memory, it undergoes a process, a molecular and cellular process. And then these two approaches merged. And now the idea is that therapists could take existing therapies and revise them knowing the scientific mechanism of it. And this is what we're working on now. There's collaborations between scientists and therapists. That there was a lot of interest, and many therapists suggested that this is what they were doing all along. So I think it was a really remarkable merging of two fields that supposed to talk more together, but that was a very unifying aspect of it, that people got it from different points.
Which makes it probably a very useful tool, isn't it? I mean, it's something that could do you think that it could replace medicine, for example?
I hope so. I think I wouldn't choose one. I think there are multiple methods. It depends on the memory, it depends on the person. You could reactivate the memory and even do ECT, electric shocks. People have done that. You can take a drug, you can combine it with behavioral interference, that what I've mentioned of introducing positive information. I think it depends on the person. It would have to be personally tailored.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's definitely, I think it's something that we all carry in us in one way or another, which is the need to deal with a memory. And I know that I'm involved in a project as an actress where I am involved to play a Holocaust survivor who is dealing with her PTSD on a daily basis. And it's really an examination of how is it affecting our present? So it's not really what happened, but it's more, how does it make us, how did it affect our choices in life? And does it affect our choices? And can we change our choices in life by doing so? Is there anything else, Liron, that you would like to invite the audience to know about your project?
For me, the point of this is that, and this relates a little bit to the previous question, is that I hope that each one of these stories, the second they're all come out, in, as Roy said, this is series 1. We hope we'll have series 2 and 3 and 4, and might not be about the Holocaust per se, but each one of these stories has given me a tool to deal with my own issues and things that I find very difficult in life. Mm-hmm. And the idea is that if that could relay that with my God-given talents to somebody else, to use what each one of these characters brings to the table, that's really all I want to accomplish here.
Mm-hmm. Anything else you'd like to say, Roy, to our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to coming to listen to this, for sure. And if you have any questions about the projects, please reach out to us. I believe Ari just posted the website and Flyke and Ripple project. We also have an Instagram. I have to obviously say that as a producer. If you want to follow it, please do. And it's an open door. You can ask us anything about the project if you have questions. And just wanted to also thank the museum, of course, and Millie and Daniela, and obviously Liron, no doubt, Ari. And very finally, also Brooklyn Council for the Arts for also continuously supporting us. So
yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
Sure, and it is really true that as trauma connects us, it also builds us as a community. And I mean, it's so relevant today, as we're still in the shadow of the George Floyd case, and but it is so important to know that there is connection between all of us, and the ripple effect that you're talking about is the ripple effect. Again, it's horizontal and vertical, and if we all just remember it, we will deepen our empathy towards each other, because we will know we're all suffering either from our own pain or from someone else's pain, but that's what makes us human. And is there anything else, Daniela, that you'd like to say about this project and what it means to you before we say
I think I think it emphasizes how memory echoes in our own life and across cultures and across generations. I know that the topic of changing memory is very emotional for people, because we think if our memories are not accurate, who are we? But I think what it does is only forces us to know what is memory and how we deal with it in different contexts. So for example, in the context of eyewitness testimony, it's unreliable, and then we would want to rely on recorded evidence. But in our personal lives, the facts and the semantics are scaffolds around which we reconstruct the details. And the emotions, the fact that they are dynamic is healthy and adaptive. And in a way, it makes us more liberated, not tied into our own personal story. So I think we can start thinking about memory more of an artist in the way we deal with our own stories. Yeah, we're still trying to figure out what it means.
That's great, because if we were ever bothered by the fact that we don't remember whether important things or not important things, that we can actually take from what you just said, the fact that it is a healthy sign of us moving through life and maybe adding more and more onto memories. So dynamic memory is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much.
Wow.
Hi, Ari.
It was amazing. Millie, wait. First, Millie.
Yes.
You are extraordinary. This was so.
I'm honored to be here.
Thank you so much, Millie. And thank you, Daniela and Roy.
And I just want to add our thanks from the museums. Fascinating to listen to you guys. And I was thinking that, I mean, for so long, the work of Holocaust museums and Holocaust educators has been all about survivor testimony, and it still is, and it always will be. But we're now at a moment in which there are fewer survivors, and it's the torch has sort of been passed to children and grandchildren. And so what you're doing is exactly the kind of work that's going to propel Holocaust memory and education forward. So it's exciting for me to have a window into your work today, and I know a lot of folks in the audience feel the same way.
And hopefully we can do a lot more.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yay.
Yeah,
Yes.
sorry we didn't get to all the questions. There were some wonderful questions.
I do want to mention that everything we do at the museum is made possible through donor support. So for those of you watching who have supported the museum, thank you. And we hope the rest of you will consider supporting the museum if you're able. I mentioned that today's program was sponsored in part through the Battery Park City Authority Community Partnership. And we have another program in that series that is actually very relevant to the conversation today. On May 19th, we are bringing together clinical psychologists from the Jewish, African American, and Native American communities to look at inherited trauma through a psychological lens across communal differences. So the conversation continues. Please check out the Ripple Project via the links in the chat, and we'll send out an email tomorrow as well, some info. And we do hope you guys join us on May 19th for another discussion.
And just
Thanks
one
again,
last thing, Ari, is there a way to watch this recorded for those who missed,
yes.
or for those who want to send it to their friends?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll include the recording in the email tomorrow, and it'll be on the museum's YouTube channel. And for Liron and Roy to see all of the Ripple Project's film work when it's done, we should just stay posted on your website, right?
Absolutely.
Social media.
Yeah. Roy will be the one announcing to the world, I have no doubt. So.
Yeah. We have a beautiful impact campaign that will hopefully follow for many, many years. We'll see. So
we will be awaiting eagerly. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.